All right, Jeremiah chapter 6, the last chapter for this week, reminded me that God is great, lest we forget. But let's call it Jeremiah chapter 6, the refining, as by the end of the chapter, God is going to talk about the thing, or at least one thing that is standing in the way of him, refining Judah into something that is once again useful. In this chapter that starts out in verse 1, calling on the people of Benjamin to flee from the midst of Jerusalem, for disaster looms once again from the north. As the first 5 verses are going to describe that disaster, verse 6 is going to go on to say, for this is a city that must be punished. There is nothing but oppression within her. Even worse, verse 7, it's going to talk about the way in which they continue to stir fresh drama. Otherwise, God might actually have a chance to forget the things or the wrongs that they had done. However, it's going to go on in verses 8 through roughly 11 to talk about the way in which he is still going to continue to warn them, but he's going to raise the question in verse 10, who will actually listen? Finding no one. In verse 11, he is going to say, therefore, he is tired of withholding his wrath, and he is going to unleash it on the city. Going through verse 12 to describe that destruction, he's going to say in verse 13, for from the greatest to the least, similar to what we heard in the last chapter, they are greedy for unjust gain. And this time, once again, he's going to say, prophet to priest, all deal falsely. Going on to talk about the way in which it's not just that they are doing wrong, it's the fact that they have done it for so long, they are no longer ashamed of the wrong that they are doing. Verse 16, once again, showing God extending an offer of help to them by saying, look for the ancient paths, to which they will respond, no. He's going to say, okay, if you won't look for the ancient paths, at least listen to the warnings of the impending destruction, my paraphrase, to which once again they're going to answer, no. Therefore, God is going to say in verse 18, okay, if they won't listen, he is going to respond to them in a way that the earth will basically either hear or respect. Understanding that he is going to bring to them in verse 19, the fruit of their devices, reminding us once again of something that Jesus will say in his early ministry in the Sermon on the Mount, the famous saying, with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Reminding us that that is also for good, but in this instance, it once again is for judgment, or to bring about justice to people who will no longer do justice on their own. Understanding that verses 19 and 20 are going to remind us of that concept of what's the point of bringing your offerings or approaching God if you're not willing to listen to the way in which he's asking us to treat one another. Understanding that, verse 21 is going to say, therefore, thus says the Lord, he is going to put stumbling blocks in their way. In verse 22, reminding them that once again, judgment is coming from the north, this time in verse 23, saying it is from a people who will have no mercy. In much the same way it seems that Judah has let oppression run rampant in the city with no mercy for those who are oppressed. Going on in verses 24 through 26, though, it seems that there are some who will finally listen, even if it is a little bit late. Too late to avoid the destruction, but God is still going to give them advice as to how they can survive the destruction that is ahead. With verse 27 seeming to take a pause for God to counsel Jeremiah, helping him to understand how he has equipped him to deal with these times. Verse 27 will say, I have made you a tester of metals among my people, that you may know and test their ways. However, in verses 28 through 30, he is going to seem to tell Jeremiah not to expect too much. God comparing himself to a refiner of metals, comparing Judah to the metal, he will describe them this way, beginning in verse 29. The bellows blow fiercely. The lead is consumed by the fire. In vain the refining goes on, for the wicked are not removed. Understanding that he does not say wickedness is not removed. He is talking about the way in which they will periodically come back to him while still clinging to those who are actually interested in something else. Once again, as verses 13 and 14 seem to say, enabled by priest and prophet that are saying, peace, peace, when there actually is no peace. Or, as we may get a chance to see in the next chapter, they're declaring themselves delivered while they're still stealing, killing, committing adultery, lying, or, as we've described idolatry in the past, creating their own narratives about what it is that God really wants.